Thank you for listening to Tales from Wytch Haven. This podcast is created by Dan Lee and Rodeo Whiter and produced by Rodeax. Hello, thanks for tuning in. I'm Jackson Thorne reporting to you from JT Auto Repairs for all your motoring needs. As always, I'm joined by co-host and published author Imelda Blackwood.
Thank you, Jackson. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. If this is the first time you've tuned in, congratulations. You've made it. On this public access radio show, we aim to uncover all of the mysteries of our unassuming little town and expose them for what they are. A dark conspiracy, a supernatural threat from the great beyond, or just a big misunderstanding.
It's that time of year again in Wytch Haven. The Scarecrow Ball is upon us, and that is exactly where this mystery takes place, in the pumpkin patches of Wytch Haven.
For years now, residents of Wytch Haven have upheld this tradition in celebration of our humble pumpkins. It's at this time of year when the pumpkin keepers put up their charmingly ragged scarecrows in order to keep the pumpkins off of the birds.
It tends to bring the town together, and it's so much fun.
I do love the Scarecrow Ball. It's the one time of year that no one tries to vandalise my car, and in light of recent events, I've had to buy myself a brand new orange dress for this year.
Is that the one you showed me the other day with the glitter up the sleeves?
Oh, it's not glitter, it's moon dust embellishment. Very fancy, I'm told.
I didn't think you liked being fancy.
Of course I do. There's a lot you don't know about me, Mr. Thorne.
No, there isn't.
Well, that's as may be, but for the Scarecrow Ball, I'm always resplendent. I've even picked out the necklace I'm going to wear with it.
Which one?
The silver one, shaped like the waxing crescent. My theme this year is twice in an orange moon.
Obviously. As you listeners will know, the Scarecrow Ball was all set for last Friday, but it was cut short by an event that no one could have predicted.
The lanterns were lit all along the way, the pumpkin beer flowed freely from its barrels, and all of the townsfolk were flocking to the fields in their finery. As usual, the pumpkin patch was roped off to avoid any mishaps, and the pumpkin keepers were waiting in the wings with their scarecrows. It was only when the ceremony started that the event went awry.
As always, the pumpkin keepers walked through the patch, all in their thick leather boots to protect them from wandering fangs.
Watching from the neighbouring field, we could see the tiny pumpkins, no bigger than a fresh ball of yarn, as they clumped along in their playful bid to follow their keepers. As always, held back by their stems, they tried their usual trick of gnawing at the keepers' ankles.
Everything was going as planned. The townsfolk were all watching, smiling as the pumpkin keepers took their place in the patch. Then, all at once, they planted their scarecrows and began hammering their posts into the ground in perfect unison.
It really is quite a spectacle.
More so this year than ever. Usually the keepers would plant their scarecrows, the fireworks would go off, and then the party would really get started. But this year, as soon as the posts could stand on their own, the scarecrows started to move.
Yes, the pumpkin keepers had hardly finished hammering them into the earth when the first of the scarecrows swung its head groggily towards the keeper and looked him dead in the face. The keeper reeled back in fright, alerting the other keepers that something was wrong. A murmur passed through the worried throng of townsfolk, and at that moment, a scream of terror ripped through the warm evening air. All of the scarecrows were writhing with animation, drunkenly thrashing free from their posts. The first had already broken its bonds and was staggering manically towards its keeper. Its gait was a lurid display of the macabre. Abhorrent and terrifying, it lurched and careened towards its keeper at a frightening speed. The pumpkin keeper stumbled backwards, falling into the pumpkin patch, and without falter, the scarecrow fell upon him, ensnaring him in a near-deadly embrace. The pumpkins had their wicked way with him.
Similar events were unfolding across the pumpkin patch. Every single keeper was attacked by his or her scarecrow. Most managed to escape, but 3 of them weren't so lucky. The townsfolk were in a frenzy. We were all horrified. People started running down the hill to try to escape. The band dropped their instruments and fled. The scarecrows had reached the field, dragging the string of lanterns behind them as they busted through it. That's when someone had the bright idea to set one of them on fire.
That's right. One librarian, who shall remain nameless, took it upon himself to play the hero and use one of the lanterns to set a scarecrow on fire.
So now not only was the party being crashed by scarecrows, but it was also being crashed by flaming scarecrows.
If it wasn't for Farmer Travis's quick thinking, it could have quite easily descended into a major catastrophe.
Luckily, he had his tractor handy, and he ploughed right through the scarecrows, sending straw flying everywhere. Needless to say, the party was over.
We took it upon ourselves to investigate this case and find out just who was to blame for the heinous act that befell the ball.
This time we had seen firsthand what had happened. Without our usual outsider's perspective, we didn't know what to do, or who to speak to.
After a little deliberation, we decided to speak to one of the pumpkin keepers that got attacked. Unfortunately, he was being hurried away on a stretcher. When he had fallen to the ground, the pumpkins had gotten a little caught up in the excitement, so he didn't really give us much to go on.
He basically told us what we had already witnessed firsthand. He didn't lend any clue as to who was behind it, and as far as we knew, the whole town was there.
We did, however, inspect one of the scarecrows once we were convinced that it was inactive.
When I first picked up the head, a weak purple flame was still glowing in the scarecrow's eye. Before we left, I made sure to stamp it out.
That settled it. Magic was surely to blame for the sudden scarecrow revolt, but just who cast it, we did not know.
Well, first up we had to talk to the Sisters of the Blood Moon.
Of course, they're well known in Wytch Haven for their craft. However, their residual colour is usually red or orange, so I wasn't convinced that they were behind it. However, we thought it best to question them anyway.
We went to find the High Priestess of that particular coven, Lilith Grey.
Her name is still Lily.
But apparently she was on some conference of the craft, so we had to speak with Eliza Winterbrook instead. She's Lilith's, I don't know what you would call it, a second priestess?
An under-priestess?
Whatever she was, she's the second in command, and far less agreeable than her superior. She just kept saying, how could we accuse the Sisters of the Blood Moon of unlawful use of magic?
I've always thought pen-pushing witches are the worst.
You know that's what the whole town calls you, right?
Yes, but that's just because they don't understand literature. I mean, I can't stand bureaucracy among witches. It's all counsel this and unlawful that.
I don't disagree. We didn't get a straight answer out of Eliza at all, which aroused our suspicion.
I assumed that whoever had animated the scarecrows must have been a safe distance away. If they were in the crowd with everyone else, people would suspect them. It is common knowledge, after all, that when a person is using magic, their eyes tend to get a bit glowy. So we set about making a list of everyone present at the scene.
Now, we knew of a couple of people that weren't there. Mr. Jarvels never goes to the Scarecrow Ball because of his allergy to pumpkins, and Mrs. Flatcap had to sit this one out because the thing in her basement was playing up again. Apart from those two, and of course Lilith, we thought everyone else was there. We even went door to door asking if anyone was acting suspicious.
It briefly crossed my mind that it could be a child of the coven who was going through the change. You know, when a child first cultivates their magical abilities, they tend to manifest quite strongly. But all of the children were accounted for by their friends and parents. So our next step was to figure out who in the town might have magical abilities who did not belong to the sisterhood. They had to be a rogue or a member of a different coven to account for the peculiar pigmentation of the flame.
It was getting quite late by this point, so we decided that coffee was our best course of action. So we took a table at the Crooked Kettle and began going over all of the facts. Then we heard a scream from outside. Usually we wouldn't think anything of it, just another overzealous ghoul or a rather vocal werewolf, but then it happened again and again, and we realised that it wasn't just one person, it was a crowd.
We abandoned our coffee and rushed towards the screams. And there, as we stood in the doorway and watched, an army of scarecrows marched down the street in some twisted parade. They were overturning vehicles, throwing bricks through windows, setting things on fire. Sheer carnage had descended upon the town.
This time, though, they seemed a bit more together. They weren't clumsily flailing at people. They were working together to entrap the townsfolk and terrorise them.
It was monstrous.
We had to think fast. In the field we had the tractor, but down here in the town there was no protection. Facing a scarecrow one-on-one would be fine, but in a big group like this, they could easily overpower the townsfolk.
They seemed to be almost herding the townsfolk through the street. Every alleyway and cut-through was blocked by more of these ghastly puppets. We could see a group of the Scarecrows heading dangerously close to the cafe, so we ran out the back of the Crooked Kettle, over the fence and into the trees. We made our way along the tree line until we had a clear view. From there we could see the scene unfolding on the street, but the Scarecrows couldn't easily detect us.
We did have a run-in with one of them, but as I said, one Scarecrow on its own is easy to deal with. We ripped it apart, and there it was again, that purple flame in the Scarecrow's eyes.
We crouched under cover of the woods, watching until the commotion had calmed and the streets were empty. It seemed that the Scarecrows had pushed everyone towards the town hall and herded everyone inside. There were bound to be a few who had escaped, but from our vantage point among the trees, it looked to be a ghost town.
At this point, I'd like to address a thought that you're probably all having right now. This whole story might sound incredibly strange and entirely fabricated. You're probably thinking you don't remember any of this. The fact is, no, you don't remember any of this, because the entire evening was erased from most of the town's memories.
A few of us still remember because the Scarecrows couldn't find us, so we didn't befall the same fate as those who gathered in the town hall. I'm sure stories will start to circulate in due course.
Now the streets were quiet. We crept over out of the woods and made our way towards the town hall. There we crouched, trying to look through the windows without getting caught. We couldn't see much through the glass. It was still caked with a layer of dust from the monthly potato catch club.
But we could just about make out the cloaked figure walking up onto the stage.
A purple cloak.
A ripple of quiet seemed to pass through the town hall as I suddenly became aware of the sound of my own breath. Then the woman in the purple cloak began to speak. She addressed the town with terrible gravity, speaking of how she was cast out by the Sisters of the Blood Moon, shunned and exiled, humiliated into hiding. And as she spoke, a sense of hysteria grew throughout the crowd. The frightened cries began to sound once more, and by the time she had finished explaining her terrible plan, a panic had gripped the townsfolk once more. This dark purple witch intended to enslave the town under her rule.
Everyone was screaming and trying to push their way past the Scarecrows towards their escape, but the Scarecrows pushed back.
At this point, I alerted Jackson of the fact that the sisters were not present in the hall. They must have retreated into the woods.
We had to find them. They were the only ones who could help. We thought they'd be able to counter the spell on the Scarecrows.
Then the screaming from inside ceased once more. Silence. We looked once again through the musty window. We could just make out that the cloaked figure on the stage had now lowered her hood, revealing a purple glow from her eyes. She was casting an enchantment upon the town. I tried to stand on a narrow ridge in the town hall structure, in a hope of getting a better view, but in doing so I may have slipped, which frightened me, and I may have screamed a little.
A little?
It wasn't very loud.
It was loud enough to alert everyone inside the hall. I will never forget the entire town turning to look at us with bright glowing purple rings in their eyes.
Then we heard that classic line, "Get them."
I don't think I've ever ran as fast as I did that night. We ran towards the woods, being chased first by the Scarecrows and then behind them the townsfolk. We managed to give everyone the slip for a minute or two, didn't we?
That's right. We hid inside the church and peered out of the window as the entire town stampeded past. We thought it best to wait there until danger had passed us, and then try to find the sisters.
That wasn't such a good plan, was it?
Not really, no. Well, it would have been a good plan if we weren't both peering out of the window.
One of the Scarecrows saw us, and of course he had to notify everyone else.
The whole mob was pounding at the doors, gruesome faces pressing in at every window. We could see the doors bowing in. They weren't going to last much longer.
That's when I remembered our local builder, Mr. Steves, telling me about the work he had to do in the haunted church passage. There was an underground tunnel that led from the organ in the church right into the woods. Mr. Steves was telling me about it because he had to renovate the entrance, but was getting objections from the church gargoyles. You know how they can be. Don't break what ain't fixed, they kept saying. It was a little difficult to find, but there was a secret catch on the organ that, if pressed, opened up the side and revealed the tunnel.
Of course, Jackson didn't tell me all of that at the time. He simply made a mad dash for the organ, and assuming he had a plan, I followed. We slipped inside, and just as we were closing the panel behind us, we could hear the sounds of the doors bursting open. Jackson slammed the panel shut, and we heard it click as it sealed us in, plunging us into complete darkness.
Obviously, we weren't prepared. We were still dressed up for the Scarecrow ball.
I'm sorry to say that I completely ruined my blue dress on that night's escapades, but perhaps it was a blessing in disguise, because I think I like my new orange dress even more.
Anyway,
We made our way down the passageway, completely in the dark. Our eyes widened, trying desperately to seek out some light, but all we could find was cold and damp and darkness. It was all we could do to persevere onwards, trailing our fingers along the walls in a bid to predict danger before it was too late.
the passageway seemed to go on forever, but as we turned a corner we could see light in the distance, just enough to show us the way, which was lucky because on the floor right in our path was a sleeping gargoyle.
He was sleeping until we ran into him.
Yes, he wasn't best pleased with that, was he?
No, he certainly was not.
He told us he was there in protest against the renovations. I tried to tell him that we needed to get out. We needed to get past and get to the sisters and save the town.
That insolent, overgrown bat still wouldn't let us through.
Let's be fair, he did in the end. Even if he did make us promise that the passageway wouldn't get any further renovation work done to it. Speaking of which, Mr. Steves, I'm sorry about that. I'm afraid I may have lost you that contract. Also, I'd like to apologise to Reverend Proctor. I also had to agree to the gargoyles having full run of the church on every third and first Wednesday. Sorry.
Yes, if you're making your way past the community orchard on a Wednesday night, and you can hear panpipes and flutes, don't be alarmed, it's only the church gargoyles. They'll leave you alone as long as you mind your own business.
So the gargoyle eventually let us pass.
He begrudgingly let us pass.
Either way, we managed to escape and find our way into the woods. There was a strong smell of sunflowers and chocolate, which came as a huge relief. It meant the Sisters of the Blood Moon were near. We followed our noses and it led us straight to them.
We told them what was going on, but they weren't entirely surprised, were they?
Not really. The only response they seemed to give was, "Oh no, I bet that's Morag again."
That's right. Apparently she's attempted this a couple of times now, but plans have always been foiled by the sisters.
They assumed that she had given up when the tractor ran over the Scarecrows at the ball, so the sisters had retired to the woods to regroup and try to figure out what to do with her.
Once the sisters were abreast of the situation, they gave us their word that they would try to reverse Morag's enchantment. They told us to wait in their hollow as they went to face her, but before they left, Penelope Glass, renowned in the art of divination, reeled back in the grips of a vision and told us that she couldn't see any scarecrows, only the townsfolk, guided by Morag's dark magic.
No, Penelope didn't see any scarecrows because they were going around the side and making their way towards us. We didn't know that they were there until they were practically on top of us.
We were surrounded. They were closing in. We had nowhere to go. But the next bit, I don't remember.
I looked over to Imelda and she was kneeling on the floor. I asked you what you were doing. You didn't reply and you wouldn't move. The scarecrows were getting closer and closer. We could still hear the sisters fighting with Morag and the cries of the townfolk all around as one by one they regained consciousness and fled the woods. The scarecrows were almost upon us and still Imelda wasn't moving. I didn't know what to do. We were completely surrounded. I desperately hoped that the sisters had cast some spell of protection on their hollow. Then everything went quiet. Or not quiet. I don't know. It was like all sound was sucked from the world and replaced by something beautiful, just out of earshot. Then this bright glow started emanating from Imelda, and the next thing I know, I'm being blinded by this brilliant light. I suddenly felt safe, as if all of the dangers around us had faded away. Then the light dissolved, almost sucked back into Imelda. The scarecrows were gone. Clumps of straw lay on the ground where they stood. The townsfolk had all woken up as if caught in some sort of dream, and there was Imelda, asleep in the grass, with the sisters stood around her smiling.
I remember you waking me up and taking me home, but I don't remember the light or any of that final battle.
I don't know what happened, really. Maybe it was some protective charm cast on the sisters' hollow. All I know is that the town is safe. For now.
What happened to Morag in the end?
I don't know. She wasn't there when the light faded. I did ask the sisters, but they just said she'll return. You know, the way they talk in that annoying mystical voice when they can't actually answer the question.
I know exactly what you mean. In any case, the town is safe, and for the past few days the council has been working overtime to repair all damages.
The Scarecrow Ball has been rescheduled to next week, and everything should go to plan this time.
Just remember, even the brightest of days may possess hidden danger, because in our sleepy little town, nothing is quite as it seems.
That just about wraps up this week's story, but before we go, we have a few community announcements. Mrs. Clitheroe will be baking her pumpkin jam tarts this week, so remember to catch them before they catch you. Lilith Gray would like to apologise for her absence in Wytch Haven's time of need and promises that all future craft conferences will be attended by Eliza Winterbrook instead. And due to recent developments, the church's palm reading club will no longer be held on Wednesdays, so please speak to Reverend Proctor to find out the new dates.
And finally, we are thrilled to remind everyone that this year's Scarecrow Ball will take place at the Pumpkin Patch on this Friday evening.
We're coming up to the witching hour now, so it's time we said goodbye. But remember, however uneventful your day might be, in Wytch Haven you should always be prepared for adventure. Thank you for listening to Tales from Wytch Haven. This podcast was brought to you from the minds of Dan Lee and Rodeo Writer, produced by Rodeax. If you have enjoyed your stay, please like, subscribe and follow us as we explore more mysteries from this sleepy little town. Beware, the witching hour draws near.